The real history of the vampire is a documented horror show. In the 1700s, Europe wasn't haunted by Dracula. It was consumed by a mass panic that shut down towns. This crisis forced Imperial doctors to investigate why the deceased neighbors were rising from the grave, their mouths smeared with fresh blood. We have the chilling official records of the terrifying corpse that made the word vampire famous. Stay with us. The truth is far more terrifying than the fiction.
Welcome to Shadows of Creation, where ancient legends, forgotten horrors, and supernatural wars are reborn. For those who crave the untold side of mythology, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tap the bell below.
The year is 1725. The place is the small, quiet, and deeply superstitious village of Kisilova. It sits in a remote corner of Serbia, recently brought under the massive, sprawling control of the Hapsburg monarchy. This was a land caught between worlds. On one side, the burgeoning confidence of the Western Enlightenment, on the other, the profound ancient peasant belief in the unseen. For generations, the people here, which are Serbs, Romanians, and Slavs, had lived with the whisper of the Vukodlak, the Strigoi, and the Vrikolakas, the restless, ill-willed dead who came back to steal life. But these whispers were regional. They were contained, confined to the hearth and the local graveyard. They had not yet crossed the linguistic and political borders to seize the imagination of the wider world. Then, the silence shattered. A local farmer named Petar Blagojevic died and was buried. He had been a man of unremarkable life, but approximately 10 weeks later, a wave of sickness and terror swept the village. It began with the deceased Petar allegedly returning to his former home, demanding food from his son. The son died soon after. Soon, several other villagers fell to a mysterious, rapidly draining sickness, a fever and weakness that defied any medical explanation of the time. Every victim, in their final gasps, pointed their finger at the recently deceased Petar. They cried out the local name for the monster, the vampire. The villagers, adhering to centuries-old Slavic tradition, refused to wait for any permission from distant imperial authorities. They acted on a primal, terrified certainty. They exhumed the corpse of Petar Blagojevic. When they pried open the wooden coffin, they claimed to find him perfectly preserved. His skin was still dark, ruddy, and seemed suspiciously full. His eyes, they reported, were open. His nails had appeared to grow, and most terrifyingly, his mouth and his shroud were smeared with fresh liquid blood. Convinced they had found the source of the plague, they drove a sharpened wooden stake through his chest. The villagers later swore that blood gushed forth, staining the grave dirt, accompanied by a hideous shriek that chilled the blood of every person present. The body was then quickly burned to ashes. This single horrific incident, the exhumation and destruction of Blagojevic, was the crack in the dam. This was the moment the local whispered terror went global. A Hapsburg official, an imperial administrator who had been present and witnessed the gruesome scene, wrote a detailed, sober, and genuinely bewildered report. That official, dry administrative document was quickly copied, translated into German, and published across the major cities of Western Europe. For the very first time, the intellectual hubs of Vienna, London, and Paris heard the word vampire. The Western world was immediately fascinated, but horrified. Scholars, doctors, and philosophers, steeped in the age of enlightenment and the dawning confidence of human reason, debated how such barbaric superstition could still exist within the borders of a supposedly civilized empire. They saw the peasants' terror as pure ignorance, but they could not dismiss the official documentation of the exhumation written by one of their own administrators. This strange confluence, rational inquiry meeting documented horror, lit the fuse of the Great Vampire Epidemic. This epidemic was not fought with armies or plague doctors. It was fought with shovels and fear, and the panic spread relentlessly, fueled by a new and even more complex case that erupted just a few years later. This was the case of Arnold Paule in the Serbian village of Medveja. Paule was a soldier, a retired hajduk or bandit who was widely believed to have encountered and been afflicted by a vampire years earlier in a far-off place. He had even taken traditional grisly precautions, eating soil from the alleged vampire's grave and smearing himself with its blood, a desperate attempt to inoculate himself against the plague. Paule later died, reportedly from a fall, and was buried. Then, 4 months after his death, 12 people in the village succumbed to a mysterious, rapidly deteriorating illness. They reported being strangled in their sleep. They all claimed that Arnold Paule was visiting them at night. Once again, the villagers' fear was so profound and absolute that the authorities, chastened by the Blagojevich affair, could not simply ignore them. A full-scale military and medical commission was convened. 2 Imperial military doctors, a district commander, and an official executioner arrived to conduct an investigation that was simultaneously a political inquest and a bizarre forensic operation. When they exhumed Arnold Paule's corpse, the medical commission was utterly stunned. They noted that the body, after months in the ground, appeared suspiciously well preserved. They reported that the skin was peeling, yes, but underneath they observed a new skin and nails, beneath the old decaying layers. And critically, they noted the presence of fresh liquid blood in his chest cavity and smeared around his mouth. Imagine the absolute psychological terror of that moment. An educated, rational 18th century doctor, trained in emerging science, standing over a corpse that, according to all logic, should be decaying, but instead appears suspiciously full and bloody. They did not understand the conditions of the cold, wet soil. They did not understand the chemistry of decomposition, and they were truly terrified. The commission did not conclude the man was a demon, but they did observe the symptoms of the fear. Under the final order of the authorities, Paule's corpse was staked, his head was removed, and his remains, along with the bodies of the 12 people he was accused of victimizing, were burned and thrown into the river. The entire process was meticulously recorded in what became known as the Visum et Repertum, the seen and discovered, a document that provided undeniable official imperial proof that the vampire was a crisis demanding action. This report became the undisputed sensational fuel that set the rest of Europe ablaze. The Paule case was not just a local tragedy, it was a profound philosophical crisis for the Age of Enlightenment. How could something so irrational be happening under the watch of the Great Hapsburg Empire? The concept of a demonic feeding corpse directly challenged the core beliefs of the era: order, science, and the rational mind. The ensuing vampire epidemic lasted for nearly 30 years, becoming a bizarre intellectual playground for writers and philosophers. Thousands of pamphlets, academic theses, and sensational poems were published across Europe. The intellectual elite used the vampire as a symbol of ignorance. They mocked the superstitious peasants, but they could not truly dismiss the official first-hand Hapsburg reports. The debate raged in universities, churches, and taverns. Was this a new kind of biological disease spread by a contagious spectral agent? Was it a form of mass psychological hysteria? Or was it, as the priests feared, a literal diabolical manifestation? This prolonged academic confusion served only to amplify the peasants' fear, suggesting that the monster was too clever or too ancient for even the brightest minds to conquer. Meanwhile, the actual village panic continued to spread relentlessly, driven by a deep misunderstanding of decomposition. The key to this hysteria lies in the simple, inescapable truth of what a body does underground. The peasants, who had a deep personal connection to the deceased, would exhume their loved ones after a suspected outbreak, looking for signs that the dead was feeding, and the natural process of decomposition delivered exactly what they feared. The bloated body was the first sign. A corpse in the early stages of decay produces copious gases, methane and hydrogen sulfide, which cause the abdomen to swell and the face to become bloated, sometimes even darkening the skin. This phenomenon led the peasants to conclude the corpse was full of recently drunk blood. The bloody mouth was the second undeniable proof. As gases build up, the internal pressure forces dark fluid, decompositional liquid mixed with uncoagulated blood out of the mouth and nose. The sight of a corpse weeping blood from its orifices was taken as undeniable confirmation that it had just fed. Finally, the new skin and nails. As the soft tissue of the fingertips and mouth recedes, the fingernails and teeth appear to have grown, suggesting terrifying continued life. Every single natural step of decay, every stage of rot became a signature of supernatural horror. The vampire, in its most primal historical form, was the misunderstood corpse. The hysteria finally reached a breaking point, forcing the powerful Empress Maria Theresa of the Hapsburg Empire to intervene. The matter was becoming an international embarrassment, threatening the empire's reputation for order and stability. She did not send an army. She sent her personal physician, the leading figure of the Enlightenment, Gerard van Swieten, to investigate the phenomenon scientifically. Van Swieten, a man of cold, hard empirical reason, travelled to the affected regions and concluded, with severe bureaucratic frustration, that the entire thing was a false belief. His 1755 treatise on the existence of vampires became the final authoritative voice of the Enlightenment. He definitively explained the physical signs of decomposition, detailing exactly why a body bleeds, bloats, and appears to grow hair after death. He concluded that no rational person could believe in the existence of the creatures. The Empress, acting on Van Swieten's official medical advice, issued a monumental decree. Grave desecration was strictly forbidden. This effectively ended the Great Vampire Epidemic, the real historical phenomenon, and pushed the monster out of the villages and into the safer confines of the library and the novel. The vampire, defeated by science and imperial decree, was forced to evolve. It shed its bloated peasant form. It retreated into Gothic literature, where its exotic horror was immediately seized upon by Western writers who loved the atmosphere of Transylvanian dread. The final transformation took place in the 19th century. Writers like Lord Byron, John Polidori, and Sheridan Le Fanu took the terrifying, powerful word vampire, the vague foreign atmosphere of the Slavic lands, and fused it with the aristocratic, seductive villain of the Romantic movement. By the time Bram Stoker published Dracula in 1897, the terrifying peasant monster, Petar Blagojevich, was largely forgotten. The vampire was no longer a symbol of decomposition and disease. It had become a symbol of aristocratic corruption, sexual deviance, and the ultimate decay of the Victorian social order. The modern count, charming, immortal, and elegant, was successfully born, but his essence remained the same as the man who inspired him, a terrifying entity that rises from the grave to prey on the living. The Great Vampire Epidemic of the 18th century was not just a historical curiosity. It was the moment that human fear, disease, and superstition converged to forge a myth so powerful it survived political crackdown, scientific ridicule, and philosophical scrutiny. It gave us the word, the rules, and the chilling realization that sometimes the true horror lies not in the monster that stalks the night, but in the panic that makes us turn on our own dead.